I'm Martha Scheeler. I'm with Team Hope, which is a group of citizens that have asked for public records and have created a public record library. And I'm here to interview Laura Hobbs. Hi, Laura.
Hi, Martha.
It's so good to see you. Man, it's been a while. So much has happened since we talked last. We talked about a week before the election, and a lot happened. Yeah. So tell me let's start with you. What happened in your election? Where are you at on that?
Well, right now, as it stands in my election, the front runner of the race is Alan Long. And the question is, will this go on to a runoff election?
Okay.
So if Alan Long gets over 50%, then the race will be decided during the primary. It won't continue on to November. Mm-hmm. But if he dips below 50%, then there will be a runoff in November.
And who's the runner-up?
And I'm the runner-up.
Okay.
So
you may still have a dog in this fight, huh?
Yep, I might. It's very close.
That's good.
There's about 34 votes hanging in the balance.
So can people go there, like any citizen can go there and ask for, what's the name of the report?
Results update number 7 was the last report that they printed.
Okay.
And anybody can go there and ask for that.
Do they have to pay?
No.
Okay. So if you're a citizen listening to this podcast, it would be good to pay attention, but also to go on record that we're paying attention. The officials that are counting our votes actually understand that we are observing in many ways. Is that right?
Yeah, and we do need more observers to be present. Mm-hmm. Right now, they're doing what they're calling a 1% tally, which is the way they're actually doing it is the entire Kevin Cry recount.
Are they considering that the 1% manual tally?
Well, they also did other races the week previous.
Okay.
But they're considering it part of the 1% tally. So typically a 1% tally is a random process where they choose at random different races and different batches to look at for each race. They call it random, though it's done behind closed doors, so there's no one to actually witness that it's a random process.
And you asked about that.
Yes, I asked if I could watch that or see any evidence of how that was done, and so far I've gotten no response for that.
Were you told that draw was done by a machine?
Yeah, I was told that it was a random number generator.
Once again, not observable. Mm-hmm. A machine is choosing. If a machine is used to shift votes, to change ballot images, if there's manipulation by the machines, wouldn't you think that machine would choose the right ballots to count by manual tally?
Yeah, that's the suspicion when you don't have it out there in the open for everyone to see that it's a free and fair process and a random process. There will always be suspicions. We know now for certain that this is not a random process by the fact that they've chosen to recount the entire District 1 race and part of District 2.
Right. So those that would manipulate would benefit by being ready for that recount and having preloaded some things. Now tell me what you saw in some of the reports you requested.
I did get the vote by mail ballot tracks data, and that tells you exactly when the ballot was sent out, when it was returned, and the return method. So vote by mail, drop box, over the counter, or precinct. I wanted to look at the early returns because there was something quite unusual with the early returns. These were the votes that were tabulated on Tuesday at 8:09 p.m. They were returned early by all those methods I just explained, except for not the precinct votes.
You noted that they were running the ballots through the scanners much before the election. So the tabulation happened on Election Day from the scanned ballots. Is that right?
You know, I don't know for sure that they were or not, but in the past what they have said is we'll scan them ahead of time, but we're not going to click the tabulate button.
Right. So that was in another election that you were told that.
Mm-hmm. They definitely scanned them before 8 p.m. when the polls closed. And then at 8:09 p.m. they clicked tabulate, and that's when we got the first report. A lot of people, you know, they think, well, all the people that vote early, they lean Democrat. They're more liberal, and that's why you're seeing such a stark difference between the early vote and the Election Day vote and every other ballot drop after that. So I wanted to look at that, and I looked at the BBM ballot tracks data, and I looked at districts 1, 2, 3, and 4. And in all of these districts, there was actually more ballots returned from Republicans than Democrats.
Wow.
It varied by district. District 1 had 200 more Republicans. District 2 had about 600, and on up to District 3 had 800 more. What that shows us is that it's not just Democrats voting early, it's Republicans. And in our case, in our county specifically, there are more Republicans voting early than Democrats.
Right.
That's a key point to understand, because if you look at the early vote drop versus election day tallies, there's a huge difference. And this is not typical. Historically, you wouldn't see any variation. It would be anywhere between 0 and 7% difference. Mm-hmm. It was really apparent in the 2022 primary. There was differences of up to 34% between early vote drops and election day tallies.
Really?
Yes, and it's just a stark difference. It's not normal. And we also saw that for a little bit in the 2020 general for certain races, not all of the races. But for the 2020 primary and the 2018 general, there was hardly any differences at all between early vote and election day tallies. The reason why that's suspicious is because you shouldn't see a lot of variation. We're talking about thousands of votes here. Mm-hmm. So if you have 10 votes and one more vote comes in, it could make a huge difference in the outcome. It could change the entire outcome of the election. But if you have thousands of votes and one more vote comes in, it's not going to change the overall percentage that much.
Right. Okay.
And this has to do with the law of large numbers. And of course, we can't use the law of large numbers to look at election day. But in general, I would say this trend does follow what we saw in the 2022 election, where we were looking just at the mail-in votes and analyzing the cast vote record data, and these strange trends of really, really low votes to begin with, which are indicative of front-loading.
Low on the Republican side, high on the Democrat side?
Correct. So low on the side of whoever's being cheated against.
Right.
So there's either a front-loading of fraudulent votes for the person they're cheating for, or a removal of valid votes for the person that they want to lose.
Like the Mesa pattern.
Yes. So this is the Mesa pattern of fraud, which we saw in the 2022 primary elections. And they had this pattern that I'm describing. Why we call it the Mesa pattern of fraud is because exactly what you said is they did a forensic copy of the database before and after the trusted build, and they found that about a quarter way into the vote, a new folder was created.
And you can find this information. Tina Peters was the Register of Voters in Mesa, Colorado, Mesa County, Colorado. The Secretary of State of Colorado informed her that they were going to do this trusted build, and she was like, I am sworn officer of my county to preserve the election records. She had an expert who came and did a full backup, and then they compared the backup to what the files looked like after the quote-unquote trusted build. It's funny how they use these names like trusted build that sound like it's trustworthy when it was absolutely intended to erase all the data.
And you can find more information, the movie called Selection Code. You can find it as well from Jeffrey O'Donnell's website, either going to magaraccoon.com or fingerprintsoffraud.com.
Right. And if you really just want to be entertained, the Lone Raccoon has a Rumble channel, and he literally mocks these people with parodies, and they're kind of fun to watch. So anyway.
So yeah, these big differences they're not proportional. It's a big red flag. And of course, we have to get the cast vote record data in order to verify this. I mean, this data stands on its own, but right now we don't know that it is computer manipulation that's causing these patterns. And that's what the cast vote record data would enable us to see. And so what else? Well, I've been observing, starting on election night, Kathy Allen's office was open, but she was not in her office. There was somebody else in her office. The representative from Hart InterCivic was in her office, working on his laptop and moving in between her office, I should say, and the Bat Cave, which is the room where we house the Hart InterCivic machines. So by all appearances, he was the one administering our elections. So I want to talk about what we saw with the heart machines themselves. March 11th, though don't quote me on that date, 2 of the 4 computer scanner combos had the incorrect time. And this was right after the time change happened. And I noticed it, brought it to the attention of the people that were in the other room behind the glass. And they tried to fix it and they couldn't. So she got on the phone. I don't know who she was calling, presumably calling Hart. And then she tried for about, 20 minutes to try to reboot it and get it going again. Nothing worked. So they had to just shut those 2 computers down because they were an hour behind.
Did they recount the votes that were counted with the wrong time?
Well, luckily I got there early, so I alerted them before any mistakes were made. But then the following day, we had more computer glitches. The one that was working just the day before all of a sudden skipped a whole 24 hours ahead. So it was a whole 1 day ahead of time. Again, she was calling, trying to get it to work. She couldn't get it to work. So they shut that computer down too. Only 1 out of the 4 computers were working. They're basically limping along with 1 out of the 4 scanner computer combos working. This scanner started not functioning well. About half of the ballots that went through this scanner had to be rescanned. And then on top of that, it was assigning batch numbers and duplicates. So like it would scan batch number 140, and then next thing you know, it's a new batch, a new precinct. Again, it's scanned batch number 140, like one right after each other.
We can't assume that computers don't make mistakes. They just make them faster. The whole argument for using the machines has been that they're faster and they're streamlined. And yet, when we counted by hand, we counted the day of, and we had a result the day of. And with the machines, we have to count weeks before and weeks after, and the results aren't in until they get what they want.
So what is the delay in obtaining election results? As an observer in this election, I can say the delay is the vote by mail process. What happens in our case is that when you vote in the precinct, you sign in the poll book or the paper roster, and then you've crossed that checkpoint, and then you get a precinct ballot, you fill it out. It's not in an envelope. It gets submitted and it gets counted that night. In our case here in Shasta County, gets counted at the ROV's office that very night. However, if you submit it in the mail, submit it in a Dropbox, they have to do a process. First of all, it goes through checkpoints, so it has to be signature verified. In our case, they also sort all of the ballots. They sort them by precinct, and in this election, they also sorted them by party preference, which in some states, it's illegal to pre-sort ballots.
Oh.
Yes.
Should be illegal.
I feel it should be illegal, yeah.
Right. Because then you don't have batches of ballots that just disappear all at once because they're mixed together, so it's not as easy to disappear them.
In our case, we had a group of 9 temporary employees working to open all of those envelopes. They got a deluge of envelopes, and then it took them days and days and days to open those envelopes. And then with vote by mail itself, they're allowed to continue accepting ballots as long as they're postmarked by election day. They have to wait for these ballots to come in, and then as they come in, they have to go through this whole process, signature verified, removal of the envelope, and all of that. The process of voting by mail is what has elongated the results from being released. And they saw this, and it was discussed in an MIT study in 2001. They talked about the dangers of doing absentee balloting and mail-in and all of that. So that was one of the things they discussed, is it causes a delay in the results being released.
Right. But the number of registered voters on the March 2020 primary by the county is 103,894. That's how many people were registered at that time. The Secretary of State's number is 103,883. It's a different number. I don't know how that happens.
So you're saying that our rolls don't match the rolls that the Secretary of State has for Shasta County?
They don't, as according to their statement of votes. So if you go to the Secretary of State's website, you can go to each election and you can pull up a PDF of their statement of votes. And you can also go to Shasta County or any county that you're in and the Register of Voters should be posting a statement of votes for each election. And the numbers weren't quite the same. On election day, the Shasta County's numbers for March of 2020, we're talking about one election, primary 2020, kind of like primary of 2024. It was a presidential year. The election day votes that were counted by the Registrar of Voters was 11,919. But according to the Secretary of State's numbers, it's 15,672 on election day. How do they have that much of a difference? We're talking almost 4,000 votes. We have a small county. It'd be hard to lose 4,000 votes. The November 2020, the election day by the Shasta County numbers is 13,225 votes, but the Secretary of State logs 18,258. So we're looking at 5,000 votes added at the Secretary of State. I don't know that they added. I just know I found these numbers were significantly different. Different numbers. These are the people that are paid to get the numbers right, and yet their numbers don't match. How does that work?
Dr. Frank talked about the 2020 election. There was about 3,700 more people registered as having voted with the Secretary of State than actually voted according to the ROV's office here in Shasta.
That's this number. That would be that. This number is actually off by 5,003, just between those two numbers. I mean, the statement of votes is a certified document.
I just am really concerned in general about the lack of transparency in our elections. As an observer, there's very little that they actually allow you to see. And for instance, yesterday we witnessed the precinct balancing, they call it, and that's where they go through and they look at the tabs of the people who checked in with the electronic poll book, prints out a little receipt.
Right.
Like when you go to a restaurant, you get a receipt.
Right.
So they have these receipts, and they count the number of receipts, and then they count the number of unused ballots, and they count the number of provisional ballots. And you're supposed to balance what happened on election night versus what's in this box. And they're very secretive, like they kept their voices in a low whisper. And oftentimes they couldn't even hear each other. They would have to say, "What did you say?" The door was open and we were kind of sitting outside the door straining to hear what they were saying. We finally asked them if they could at least call out how many ballots were unused, and so we could get a little bit of data from that. And they hesitated to do so. One of them, was like, "Okay, I'll try." The other one was just like, "No."
You're there to observe. And you're not even in the room with them?
Well, we were actually in the room, and they had cordoned off the section right at the opening where the door was, and we could kind of peek in a bit for maybe about 1.5, 2 feet into the room, and they were on the other side of the room whispering and counting things to themselves.
That's not observing.
I had to ask again, "Could you please talk in an audible voice?" And she was like, "Well, I'll try." But then when they were finally all done, because they said, "You can't interrupt us, you can't ask questions." When they were finally all done counting, said it's time to go home, we were asking them, "Well, what exactly were you doing just now? What were those little slips that you were counting, and what was this?" Because we didn't even know what they were looking at. And then fast forward to today, one day later, they're doing the precinct balancing, same room. Today, the door's closed. They said, "If you want to witness this procedure, you have to watch through the glass windows. You're not even allowed in the room." So
that's not observation.
No, that's not. It's not meaningful observation. Most people have that impression in their mind that there's a judge from each side, either, for or against, depending on what the race is. And that they each get to collectively decide on the intent of each ballot mark.
Right.
And that when they come to a decision on what that ballot mark is, then they go to the next ballot. That's not what's happening here. And when they're doing the 1% count, which they're actually doing as we very speak at this moment, they're not doing it that way. Remember how I talked about the group of 9 temporary election workers?
Right.
Those are the ones who are doing the recount. And they're making all the ballot decisions. They're making all the calls. Some of them are exhausted from having worked more in the last 2 weeks than they have probably in the whole last year, honestly.
Right.
Some of them I think are doing a really good job, and It's not their fault. It's the conditions they're in. And I think, though, if you want fairness and transparency, you have to have an observer from each party.
To observe, you actually have to see.
They're not allowing us to be involved whatsoever. A couple times I noticed some mistakes being made. Well, there was one worker in particular. She would count the ballot, and then she would set it in the box. In the race of District 2, there's 4 different people, so they have separated into 4 different boxes. So now she's counting one of the boxes. And at first she would start counting when she picked the ballot up, and then she switched to counting when she dropped the ballot off. Those little patterns, when you change them up, it can be confusing, especially if you're tired or, you know.
Yeah.
So when she was doing that part, she, on 3 different occasions, made a mistake. And at first I was like, hey, wait a second, what happened? And I was able to talk to the supervisor, and the supervisor was like, well, that's why we don't hand count, because it's prone to mistakes, you know?
So she's supposed to be nonpartisan. She's supposed to have no interest in the outcome. And she just said right there very clearly what her leaning is.
Yeah.
She should have said nothing about that. That was completely inappropriate, and it should have disqualified her from supervising.
I thought she might want to know that her employees were making mistakes, but she really didn't want to know. She said, oh, it'll just go back upstairs. So the process was it got sent back upstairs. They figured out the mistake there and then sent it back down. But it's just another layer of separation.
She made a mistake, and you saw the mistake being made. Mm-hmm. The machines, you can't see it making a mistake or intentionally changing votes, miscounting, being inaccurate. You can't tell that with the machine if you don't have an accurate counting of the votes, if the people don't get to choose their leaders. And California is a great example of not having chosen our leaders and what they do. And we see it all the way down to these county clerks. They're administering these elections with wanton disregard for the laws that protect our votes.
Well, there was certainly the attitude that we were second-class citizens. One of the people that were there on the first day wasn't even allowed to use the bathroom.
She wasn't allowed to use the bathroom.
Yeah. By the second day, they did let her. You know, it's like you're really putting them out if you ask for anything.
Apparently, they've forgotten who they work for. As far as I can see, all of our sales tax that we pay, every time you buy, anytime you get gas, you're paying their salaries. They actually work for us.
Yep, exactly.
We're literally paying them to take away our freedoms. That's what we're doing. We have to remember these people, they do the bidding of their masters. They are not powerful people. The only power they get is what they take by these petty little moves.
Yeah.
They simply do the bidding of their masters. You can't assume that any county clerk, you can't assume that even the secretaries of state are powerful people. They're not. They do the biddings of their masters. All of this is done throughout the United States and frankly throughout the world. This is all done and managed by the masters of these people, and they're not powerful people. They do what they're told. So,
and that's how they like to pick their politicians, people that will do what they're told, people that are easy to manipulate and that have dirt and history and background where they can be blackmailed.
Right. Speaking of that, I heard that Gavin Newsom is suggesting that he's going to punish people for leaving the state of California.
Really? How's he going to do that?
I'm not really sure. There was something that came out this week, and he said they shouldn't be able to just leave and take their resources with them. So this man thinks that he owns other people.
He owns us.
We're just resources. Isn't that kind of interesting?
Yeah, that's very interesting.
And then you have people in some counties that are saying that you need to register your well.
Yeah.
Yeah, the well you paid for it. You paid to have it put in. You paid all the taxes you paid the permit fees to have it put in. You pay for the power to pull the water. If you pull water out of the ground in this dry place that we live in, no, they ought to leave you alone because you're paying for it. But now they want you to register your well so they can begin to put taxes on water that you draw from your own property.
And probably eventually they may even want to limit the amount of water that you use.
Yeah, because they think they're gods.
And they want to be able to get paid for that water that you took out of the ground.
The AB 969 law that they passed, they didn't do it in the proper order. So basically, to make it illegal to hand count ballots, they would have needed to have removed the laws that provided for the process of counting by hand.
Right, and let's talk about one of those laws. California Election Code 19207 grants the authority to the county governing board, the Board of Supervisors, to adopt any kind of voting system or combination of voting systems. That's one of the laws that it's violating.
So AB 969 was passed in violation of established election law.
Yeah.
Okay.
Another one that they are violating is California Election Code 19003, which states that any city or county ordinance shall govern voting systems unless the other provision of law is deemed consistent with this division. So it's confusing the way it's written, but I have talked to somebody who specializes in election law, and they confirmed that the interpretation here is that the county laws and the ordinances supersede any state law in regards to voting systems.
Okay.
And it's incumbent upon the county to dictate the manner in which elections are conducted.
So the state cannot mandate the use of machines. Mm-hmm. They can't, based on that code.
Mm-hmm. And then the other one is California Elections Code 19001, which states the real will of the electors will not be defeated by any informality or failure to comply with all the provisions of the law. So, if the real will of the electors in Shasta County is determined by hand counting, then enforcing AB 969 would be in direct violation of California Elections Code 19001.
So why aren't we counting by hand?
Well, one thing that we need is the Board of Supervisors can pass an ordinance saying that in Shasta County, it is our law and our policy that all ballots shall be hand counted.
Right, which they kind of already said that.
Technically, they said they wanted to end the Dominion contract.
Oh, so they didn't say it completely.
They didn't specify it, although it was implied for sure.
They had plenty of time to pass a resolution to make an ordinance to count by hand. I don't think we would have the Kevin Cry recall. The thing that keeps happening is there's all these moves and counter moves and all this, and it's almost like what I've observed is deer in the headlights.
I'm very passionate about this. I want it done, yesterday.
Yeah.
I think we need to continue moving forward quickly. I think I firmly believe that it's within our rights, our constitutional rights here in California and our U.S. Constitution, that we should decide the manner in which our elections are conducted here as a local county. And the California Constitution protects that. They have very strong plenary rights that give the county the authority to self-govern. The way that the U.S. Constitution works is similar. The California Constitution was modeled after that. The federal government cannot dictate to the states how they're going to conduct their elections. Some states will do caucusing and other states will do other methods.
Right.
So likewise, the California state cannot dictate to the California counties how they're going to conduct their elections.
Exactly. Well, Laura, thank you so much for being here today. I'm excited to see what happens with your race. I think, won't it be fun to have a runoff?
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. Thank you.
God bless you.
God bless you too.